I hadn't been home for Thanksgiving in years. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, the November air bit through my coat, sharper than I remembered. The house stood with its neat white shutters and glowing windows, inviting on the outside, yet I felt none of that warmth. I sat in the car for a moment, gathering myself. Inside, voices and laughter spilled out, muffled, but vibrant. It was clear they hadn't missed me. My absence never dimmed their celebration. Stepping out, I carried a small bag in one hand. I rang the bell, though I knew I didn't need to. Cordelia opened the door with a grin that widened at the sight of me, but not for the reason one might expect. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice carried the tone of a man who owned the place, though he didn't. The warmth inside hit me like a wall of smells: roast turkey, pumpkin pie, spiced cider. My mother, Rowena, glanced up from the kitchen. "Oh, hi," she said, wiping her hands on a towel, her eyes already sliding past me. In contrast, when Cordelia walked back in, the room erupted in greetings, his hand clapped by uncles, his shoulders embraced by aunts. I received nods, faint smiles, the kind reserved for a neighbor passing by. I stood for a moment, silent. Maya Angelou once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." I wish I had listened years ago. Dinner was set in the formal dining room. I found my seat at the far end of the table, almost touching the sideboard, while Cordelia sat near the head, basking in attention. He raised his glass, recounting his latest promotion, each word punctuated with nods of admiration. "It's been a big year," he said. "My team has really shown the industry what leadership looks like." I forced myself to cut into the turkey on my plate, listening to the cadence of their praise. Aunt Mildred leaned toward me with a polite smile. "And you? Still teaching at that little community college?" Her tone was honeyed, but her words left a sting. "Yes," I answered evenly. "Teaching has its value." She tilted her head, eyes gleaming. "That must be fulfilling." The pause carried the weight of dismissal. Around the table, others gave me quick glances, the kind that tested whether I'd snap back or let it slide. I chose silence, the skill I'd honed for decades. Cordelia chuckled, patting my shoulder as if to shield me from pity. "Don't worry about her, Aunt Mildred. She likes the simple life." His words earned laughter, not cruel in sound, but cruel in intent. I cut another piece of turkey, chewing slowly, each bite tasting of cardboard. Then came the moment that seared itself deeper than any casual remark. Enola, a guest I hadn't met before, tall, polished, her coat draped over her chair, turned to me with a smile. "Sweetheart, could you bring me another glass of wine?" At first I thought she was joking. I blinked, waiting for her to catch her mistake, but no one corrected her. Cordelia smirked over the rim of his glass. Rowena focused on the cranberry sauce, as if she hadn't heard. Aster, my sister, looked away. "I'm not serving tonight," I said quietly, my voice steady though my pulse pounded. Enola's face colored, but before she could apologize, Cordelia leaned forward. "Oh, don't be shy. You've always been so helpful in the kitchen. She probably thought you worked here." The table erupted in laughter, nervous but sharp. My mother didn't look at me. My chest tightened, but I swallowed the heat rising in my throat. For a second, I wondered if maybe I had disappeared entirely. Cordelia wasn't finished. He clinked his glass for attention. "You know," he began, his eyes shining with mischief, "maybe she should just take a permanent role in the kitchen. At least that's a real job." The words landed like stones. Laughter rolled through the room, louder this time, echoing against the walls until it felt deafening. I kept my face still, lifting my fork as if nothing pierced me. Inside, the burn mixed rage with shame, two fires feeding one another. They didn't know, couldn't know, that every smirk was building a case I'd present in silence. I had learned long ago that anger, when revealed, gave them the victory they wanted, but anger hidden, channeled, could grow into something far stronger. I smiled faintly, not at them, but at myself. Because while they joked and dismissed, they sat under a roof they believed was Cordelia's stage. They had no idea. They think I'm powerless, but they have no idea whose roof they're sitting under. The chair beneath me wobbled from the moment I sat down, but I tried not to shift my weight too much. Everyone else sat in sturdy wooden seats, while mine looked like something pulled from the garage. Cordelia sat at the head, his chair tall and polished, making him appear almost regal. It was intentional, of course. These things always were. "Careful," Uncle James called down the table with a smirk. "Don't go breaking that one." I forced a small smile and reached for my glass of water. The legs creaked under me. People whispered, chuckled. My cousin muttered just loud enough for others to hear. Some things never change. Then, without warning, the chair gave way. I landed hard, the sound of splintering wood drowned by a burst of laughter that spread like wildfire across the room. My cheeks flushed, but not from the fall. It was the sound, that rolling laughter filling the dining room, that burned the most. As I pushed myself off the floor, I thought, I wasn't sitting at the table, I was the entertainment. They laughed while I stood, brushing myself off, each movement deliberate so I wouldn't give them the spectacle of tears. Cordelia leaned back, grinning like he'd orchestrated the whole thing. "Well, at least you still know how to make an entrance," he said, and the laughter roared again. "Clumsy as ever," Aster added, shaking her head like I was a child dropping her toys. I straightened my sweater, lifted my chin, and moved the broken chair aside without a word. My silence unsettled them. They were expecting a protest, a sharp remark. My restraint made their jokes feel cheap even as they tried to stretch the moment further. Cordelia jabbed his fork in my direction. "Honestly, you remind me of those kids who never quite grow up, always tripping over yourself." The table chuckled again. I heard one aunt murmur to another, "She's 32, isn't she?" "Still can't hold it together." I wanted to respond, but I reminded myself of what my grandmother once told me. Dignity is not what they give you. It's what you refuse to let them take. So I sat in silence. They wanted me to explode, to give them the satisfaction of pointing and saying, "See? She's unstable." Instead, I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, my eyes steady on Cordelia. That only made him fidget for a second before he recovered and smirked again. Inside, though, tension coiled. My composure wasn't weakness. It was the rope tightening before the snap. After the meal carried on, wine glasses clinked. Conversation drifted from football to business, to the rising cost of everything. But inevitably, someone would circle back to me, as if my presence was too strange to ignore. "Madeline, dear," Aunt Mildred began sweetly, "you must be glad for a simple life. No pressure, no big risks. It must be comfortable." Cordelia chimed in before I could answer. "Comfortable? That's a nice way to put it." He laughed and reached for the wine. "Maybe she should just shave it all off, start fresh. Might do her some good." A few people chuckled awkwardly, thinking it was just another jab. Then Cordelia stood up and reached into a bag he had tucked near his chair. My stomach dropped as he pulled out clippers, the same ones he used to buzz his own hair. "Cordelia," Rowena said half-heartedly, her voice more amused than alarmed. "Don't be ridiculous." But he was already moving toward me, the crowd stirring with half-nervous laughter. No, think about it," he said, voice slurring slightly from wine. "A clean slate, isn't that what you need?" I froze as he pressed a heavy hand to my shoulder. The buzz of the clippers filled the room, louder than any of their voices. Aster covered her mouth, giggling. Some cousins laughed outright, others went quiet, their silence a consent that cut deeper than the clippers themselves. The first lock of my hair fell to the floor, and I felt the sting, not physical, but something deeper, almost spiritual. Hair. For women, it's not just vanity, it's identity. They knew that. Cordelia grinned, triumphant, while guests shifted in their seats, torn between amusement and discomfort. I sat rigid, my eyes fixed on the far wall. Every second etched itself into memory. "See?" he said proudly, showing off the clippers like a prize. "She looks better already." Enola, the guest who had mistaken me for the help earlier, muttered unconvincingly, "It's just hair. It'll grow back." I met her eyes, silent, refusing to give her or anyone the satisfaction of tears. Inside, I repeated to myself, "This will not be the end of me. This moment belongs to them, but the future belongs to me." When Cordelia was finished, he dropped the clippers on the table, laughing as though he'd just performed a parlor trick. People clapped nervously, some embarrassed, others pretending it was all in good fun. Plates of turkey and bowls of stuffing were passed again, conversation resuming as if nothing had happened. I sat there, touching the stubble on my head, feeling the chill settle over me. They went back to football scores and family gossip while I felt invisible, stripped bare like an object instead of a daughter, a sister, a woman. but inside, something solidified. If they want me bald, I'll show them what power looks like stripped bare. Across the room, I caught my reflection in the glass cabinet holding the fine china. My shorn head glared back at me, raw and unyielding. I stared until my lips curled in the faintest smile. They thought they took my crown. They only handed me my weapon. The cold air of the garage hit me harder than the buzz of the clippers had. As the door shut behind me, the warmth of the house was sealed away, leaving me in a shell of concrete and shadows. My breath fogged in front of me, curling like smoke before vanishing. The buzz of those clippers still echoed inside my head, like a swarm I couldn't escape. The laughter that had followed me here was muffled now, just faint echoes bleeding through the walls, but it rang louder in my chest. The smell of old paint and gasoline filled my nostrils. Boxes stacked high in the corners bore the dust of neglect. Holiday decorations with broken bulbs, forgotten golf clubs, cardboard sagging from damp. I pulled the cot closer to the space heater, but its weak hum barely dented the icy air. I sat down, rubbing my scalp, the rawness still startling to the touch. My body ached, not from the fall, not from the force, but from the weight of being stripped bare. I whispered to myself, "The clippers are quiet, but they're still screaming in me." It was a strange kind of silence, louder than the house I'd just left. I looked around at the objects that had once seemed ordinary. Dusty boxes, cracked picture frames tossed into storage. They felt like companions now, symbols of what my family thought of me. Forgotten, disposable, tucked away until convenient. I pulled the thin blanket around my shoulders and sat there, letting the ache wash through me. Isolation had a taste, metallic, sharp, cold. As I paced, rubbing my arms to keep the chill from seeping deeper, a faint red glow caught my eye. In the far corner, just above the stacked lawn chairs, a small, blinking light flickered steadily. I stopped. It was the security camera, silently recording everything. I froze, realization hitting me like another blow. Every second of humiliation, every laugh, every stroke of those clippers, captured. My chest tightened. "They thought it was funny," I whispered, eyes fixed on that small light. "But the camera doesn't laugh." I sank onto the cot, my mind racing. Should I use it? What would happen if the footage came out? They wanted me silenced, invisible. But here was proof, undeniable and impartial. Evidence is power, quiet, patient, waiting for the right moment. I stood again, walking under the blinking red glow. "You're my witness," I said softly, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "You don't forget. You don't excuse." The thought steadied me. They had their circle of applause, but I had something stronger. Truth. I ran my fingers across the edge of the cot, grounding myself in the idea that silence was no longer just endurance. Silence could be a strategy. My first weapon was already in hand. The chill of the room triggered a memory I hadn't thought about in years. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was 12 again, sitting on the edge of my bed while Rowena brushed my hair. She had done it gently, each stroke smooth and careful, her voice soft. "This is your crown, Maddie," she'd said then, smiling at my reflection in the mirror. "Never forget that. A woman's hair is her crown." The memory cut me now, because that same woman had sat at the table tonight and laughed as my brother shaved it all off. I bit the inside of my cheek, tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Hair grows back, I thought bitterly. But they can't regrow what they cut from my soul. I remembered how proud I had felt that night years ago, with braids that shimmered under the school auditorium lights, my mother clapping in the front row. That image clashed violently with tonight's reflection in the china cabinet. Once, she'd celebrated me. Tonight, she buried me under her silence. Yet even in that cruel irony, the memory became an anchor. If once I was told I had a crown, maybe it meant I had carried it all along, whether they saw it or not. For a moment, I thought of Petunia, our neighbor. She had always been kind in ways too small for others to notice. A casserole left at our door when I was sick, a kind word when no one else had them to spare. The thought reminded me that not everyone turned their back. Somewhere, beyond these walls, humanity still existed. That flicker kept me from collapsing into despair. I pulled the blanket tighter and whispered, "I will not beg. I will not break." They wanted silence. I'll give them silence. On my terms. I leaned back against the cot, staring at the ceiling beams above, my words steady. As Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Tonight, I revoke my consent." The phrase tasted strong on my tongue. I realized I wasn't powerless, not truly. Power doesn't come from their approval. It comes from deciding I'm not defined by their cruelty. I let the thought linger, turning over slowly into resolve. I didn't know yet what steps I'd take, but I knew this. I would not remain the victim they thought they created. Not anymore. I lay back on the cot, the red blinking light still glowing faintly in the corner. I stared at it, my breath fogging the air, and whispered one last promise into the empty room. They locked me in the garage, but they forgot. I'm never truly alone when the truth is watching. Rowena opened the garage door the next morning, as though she were performing an ordinary chore. She didn't meet my eyes. Her lips curved into something that was neither smile nor frown, a mask she'd worn all my life. The smell of fresh coffee drifted out from the kitchen, pancakes sizzled on the griddle, and Cordelia's voice carried with the easy cheer of someone who had never known exile. I stepped into the hallway, my joints stiff from the cold night on that metal cot. The warmth of the house wrapped around me, but I felt none of it. They had eaten, laughed, and slept comfortably while I lay awake, counting the groans of the heater in the garage. Rowena gestured vaguely. "Breakfast's almost done. Sit." She moved past me as if nothing had happened the night before. I followed the sounds into the dining room. Cordelia sat at the table, leaning back comfortably as though he'd earned every inch of space. Syrup gleamed on his plate, butter melted into golden stacks of pancakes. My stomach clenched at the sight, not from hunger, but from the contrast. Him, pampered. Me, stiff and raw. They can erase cruelty, I thought, as easily as wiping syrup off the table. I slid into the chair at the far end. My hands rested in my lap, still, composed. The resentment burned under the surface, but I let it show only in my eyes. I noticed Aster across the room, phone tilted in her hand. She wasn't texting. She was watching something. Whispering to a cousin beside her, she pressed play again. The faint buzz of the clippers filled the quiet, replayed on her screen. Rowena caught the sound and chuckled under her breath. "Kids being kids," she murmured, though we were all well into our 30s. Cordelia grinned, turning toward me. "Morning, Baldy. How'd you sleep out in your suite?" Bet the garage felt just like home. The table laughed, not all at once, but enough to stitch the wound deeper. I kept my voice low, calm. "You all enjoyed the show enough to replay it?" Aster smirked. "It's just funny. Don't be so sensitive." "Funny," I repeated, letting the word linger. "Yes, hilarious, I'm sure." Rowena dabbed her mouth with a napkin. "You should be grateful we give you a place at all. Some families wouldn't." That line slid into me like ice. Grateful. For humiliation, for exile, for a cot in the garage while guests slept inside. I stared at her, unflinching, though my voice never rose. Mark Twain once said, "Never argue with stupid people. They will drag you down to their level and then beat you with experience." I thought of that and chose silence over the stage they were building. But inside, every word carved me closer to the edge. The doorbell rang, and more relatives filed in with coats and chatter. The house grew crowded, filled with voices and footsteps, and the eyes that turned toward me carried the same unspoken story. Outsider. As I stood to move aside, Rowena's voice rang out above the noise. "Since we have more families staying tonight, we'll need the rooms. Madeline will take the garage again." The announcement was public, deliberate. Heads turned. No one objected. Cordelia clapped his hands together as though it were a punchline. "That settles it then," he said. "Back to the guest wing for the rest of us, and the garage wing for her." Laughter rippled. Even those who didn't laugh stayed silent, their complicity louder than any noise. I felt my face steady into steel. It wasn't just eviction, it was exile. I thought of the house, the walls, the mortgage payments, the hidden truths they never imagined. They valued appearances more than decency, and for that, they banished me publicly. The sting was sharp, but under it, something stronger stirred. This was the turning point. My silence had been patience, not surrender. I gathered my plate slowly, set it in the sink, and walked back toward the hallway. But before I left, I paused. My voice cut through the air, calm but edged with something colder than anger. "Sometimes," I said evenly, "the rooms you think you own aren't really yours." They stared at me for a beat before the nervous laughter began. Cordelia shook his head. Cryptic as always. She thinks she's some kind of philosopher. Rowena forced a small smile. Ignore her. She likes to talk in riddles. I let their dismissal hang in the air, choosing not to elaborate. I didn't need to. They didn't understand it was a warning, not a riddle. I turned toward the back door, my steps measured. As I walked the path toward the garage once again, the cold already seeping through the thin sweater, my thoughts sharpened into a whisper only I could hear. They thought banishing me was power. But they have no idea I was already building my escape. The house grew louder as the day wore on. More cousins arrived, arms full of pies and bottles of wine, their laughter swelling like the walls themselves couldn't contain it. Each one was greeted with warmth, their coats taken, seats offered, their plates piled high before they'd even finished setting their things down. I stood near the doorway, half in the shadow of the hall, half in the glow of the dining room. "Madeline, you look tired," one cousin remarked, glancing at me as though I were part of the furniture. "Still teaching those community classes?" "Yes," I said simply. Her smile tightened, then faded, replaced by a quick pivot to Cordelia. "And Cordy, tell us again about that promotion." The table leaned toward him like sunflowers toward the sun. He launched into the same rehearsed story I'd heard 3 times now, each detail polished to shine under their admiration. I sipped water and let the words slide past me. In this house, I was never a daughter. I was a shadow. They welcomed the world inside, but I was treated as if I had slipped in uninvited. The warmth of the kitchen, the chatter over dessert plates, it all carried on as though I wasn't standing there, breathing the same air. When the meal stretched long into the evening, Rowena rose, her hands folded in front of her like a hostess addressing a crowd. "With so many here tonight," she said brightly, "we'll need to rearrange the sleeping arrangements." My chest tightened. She turned, her voice even but sharp as a knife. "Madeline, you'll stay in the garage again. We need the bedrooms for guests." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Cordelia smirked. "At least she won't bother anyone out there." A few cousins laughed. Others pressed lips together, saying nothing. Their silence weighed heavier than the laughter. I didn't argue. The room seemed to lean against me, watching to see if I'd protest, waiting for me to hand them another reason to call me ungrateful. The door to the garage shut behind me with a heavy slam. The sound wasn't just a door closing, it was a seal, a verdict. The air was sharper now, my breath puffing out in clouds as I crossed to the cot. My body shook, not from fear, but from the deep ache of rejection. They didn't just send me to the garage, I thought. They locked me into the role they'd written for me. Hours later, when the hum of voices from inside had died down, I knocked lightly at the kitchen door. Rowena appeared, her expression flat. "I need another blanket," I said quietly. She left without a word, returning with something balled in her arms. She thrust it toward me. The smell hit first. Stale, musky. When I unfolded it, I saw it was the old blanket the dog used to sleep on, matted and ragged from years of paws and drool. My throat tightened. "This is the only one?" Rowena's eyes didn't waver. "It's warm enough." I took it, holding the weight of humiliation in my hands. Back in the garage, I wrapped myself in it, the stink filling my lungs. My skin crawled, but I pulled it tighter. Not because I wanted its warmth, but because I refused to let the gesture break me. "Dignity doesn't come from what covers you," I whispered into the dark. "It comes from what you carry inside." Tears blurred my vision, hot against the cold air. I let them brim, but not fall. I would not give them that victory. I sat upright on the cot, staring into the shadows above me. My hands clenched the filthy blanket. If they think this is defeat, I told myself, they're wrong. I lay back, but didn't curl into myself. My body stretched against the cot, chin lifted, eyes tracing the beams of the ceiling, each breath steadied. My silence wasn't surrender, it was a strategy. They had no idea how patient I could be. I pressed the blanket closer, the reek invading my senses, but my eyes burned not from shame but from resolve. They mistook exile for victory, I thought. They forgot that even shadows can grow teeth in the dark. The night deepened in the garage. I sat hunched on the cot, the ragged blanket still clinging to my shoulders. My breath clouded in front of me, vanishing into the stale air of paint fumes and gasoline. My body felt heavy, but my mind refused to surrender to sleep. The humiliation of the day still pressed down on me, sharp as glass under skin. Then I heard it, a gentle knock at the garage door. It startled me, soft but deliberate. For a moment, I wondered if Rowena had come back to press the knife deeper, another cruel gesture dressed as kindness. But when I opened the door slightly, the figure outside wasn't family. It was Petunia, our neighbor. She didn't speak, only smiled faintly and handed me a mug. Steam curled upward, rich with the scent of cocoa. "It's cold," she whispered. "I thought you could use this." I took it in both hands, the heat seeping into my palms. "Thank you," I said quietly. She touched my arm gently. "Don't let them take everything from you." Then she left, slipping back into the night without waiting for a reply. I sat back on the cot, staring into the mug. The warmth rose into my face, the sweetness resting on my tongue after the first sip. It wasn't just cocoa, it was proof. Proof that kindness still lived in small corners, even when cruelty tried to drown it out. It wasn't just warmth, I thought. It was dignity, however small. That cup became my ember in the dark, the one spark that refused to die out. Not long after, my phone buzzed on the metal shelf beside me. Once, twice, then again and again until it seemed to vibrate with urgency. I picked it up, the screen lighting my face. Message after message filled the screen. From James, my assistant. "Board needs your approval by morning. Media rumors are swirling. Please confirm the acquisition." Another. "Your absence is making people nervous. The press is starting to ask questions." I leaned back, the buzzing still in my hand, and let a bitter smile cross my lips. "They thought they locked me away," I whispered. "But even from a garage, I moved markets." I scrolled through numbers that would make Cordelia's proudest boasts look like pocket change. Millions at my fingertips, entire companies shifting on my approval. The irony was exquisite. Here, I was treated like a burden. On my phone, I was indispensable. Another message popped up. "London investors demand reassurance. We need your statement by noon EST." I typed slowly. "Proceed as planned. I'll review contracts in the morning." My thumbs moved with precision. No hint of anger, only control. Each word I sent traveled across oceans, reshaping decisions in boardrooms full of men who had no idea their phantom CEO was sitting in a freezing garage. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Out there, I was invisible. In here, I was the axis on which industries turned. I placed the phone beside the cooling cocoa, the two objects side by side, kindness and power. Later, as exhaustion tried to drag me under, I opened a folder on my phone, legal documents, titles, holdings. Quietly, I scrolled until the words stopped me cold, the very address of the house where I sat exiled. It was under my holding company, mine. I laughed once, low, without mirth. They mocked me under my own roof, every laugh echoed in walls I paid for. The irony was cruel and perfect. Cordelia strutted like a king in a castle that didn't even belong to him. Rowena wielded her authority in rooms secured by my signature. They had no idea that the house itself bowed to me, not to them. Why had I hidden it? Because I knew them. Their greed would have eaten it alive, stripped it bare for their vanity. I'd chosen anonymity, power hidden behind silence to keep them from clawing at what I built. I traced the lines on the document with my finger, as though to remind myself it was real. Cordelia's voice at dinner, boasting, sneering, rang differently now. His arrogance was staged inside my property. He laughed at me while standing on my foundation. As Abraham Lincoln said, I murmured to the empty garage, nearly all men can stand adversity. But if you want to test a man's character, give him power. Tonight, I understood mine. I closed the folder and locked the phone, setting it gently beside the mug. My silence had always been mocked as weakness, but silence, I now realized, was louder than shouting. The night deepened, but my mind sharpened. The cold no longer felt like punishment. It became steel, pressing me to clarity. I wasn't just surviving, I was planning. I sat upright, refusing to curl into myself as I had the first night. "If this is exile," I whispered, "let it sharpen me. If this is silence, let it be strategy. The chessboard was clear now. They were pawns moving blindly across squares they thought they owned, but the queen was already in play, silent and hidden, waiting for the move that would topple the game. I placed the cocoa mug beside the phone, two quiet symbols in the dim light. My hand lingered over them, then dropped to my lap as I whispered one last thought. They thought exile stripped me bare. They never realized it uncloaked my crown. By late morning, the house was alive again. The smell of reheated turkey mingled with cranberry sauce, and the fizz of mimosas filled the glasses. Plates clinked as leftovers from the feast were arranged on platters. Cordelia presided at the head of the dining table like a self-crowned king, basking in the admiration that swelled toward him. He tapped his glass and stood, his voice booming with practiced charm. "Here's to another year of success," he declared. "To growth, leadership, and to the family that's always supported me." Laughter and applause rolled across the table, a wave of warmth that deliberately passed over me. I kept my fork moving, pushing a piece of stuffing back and forth. Praise was currency here, and I was always bankrupt. I observed from my corner, detached but alert, letting every gesture, every word, every glance imprint itself. My silence was not empty. It was storing ammunition. Cordelia leaned forward, drawing the crowd's attention as if he were telling a campfire story. "You've all heard about the deal we closed last quarter. Landmark numbers. Truly unprecedented in our firm's history." "Oh, Cordy!" Aunt Mildred clapped. "The future of this family!" "Yes," added Uncle James, raising his glass. "You've outdone yourself. Your father would be proud." I bit down gently, the inside of my cheeks stinging. They toasted him inside my own investment. Every cheer was a theft of my work. Cordelia puffed out his chest. "It wasn't easy, but vision never is." Vision. I had funded that very project from the shadows. He was spinning my silence into his crown, every syllable rewriting truth into mythology. I sat straighter, choosing not to interrupt. As Warren Buffett said, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. Watching Cordelia, I wondered how many minutes he had left. The more he bragged, the deeper he dug his pit. I didn't need to shove. Aster joined in, her voice syrupy. "Cordelia has always had the sharpest instincts. He sees opportunities the rest of us would miss." Rowena's smile deepened, proud and certain. "He inherited his father's brilliance. Some things just run in the blood." The sting cut sharper than I expected. Once, those words had been promised to me. When I was younger, I was told I would carry the family forward. But somewhere along the way, they rewrote the story, and I was cast as a footnote. Relatives piled on compliments. "You'll be running the whole company one day. A man like you, the sky's the limit." Cordelia soaked it all in, nodding solemnly as though the crown were already on his head. I watched carefully. Family culture was a theater, building myths while burying truths. But legends built on lies collapse fastest, and I would be there to watch. The mimosas kept flowing, and Cordelia's words slurred with each refill. He grew bolder, reckless. "You know what I love about family," he said loudly, his glass raised high, "is that no matter what, they'll accept you, even if you show up bald." He turned toward me, smirking. "Guess she's finally showing her true colors, bare and empty." The table burst into laughter again. Some laughed nervously, others with full delight, pretending it was harmless banter. Rowena shook her head with a smile. "Cordy, don't tease your sister too much." Her words carried no weight, only theater. My fork hovered above my plate. Their laughter was the knife. His words were the twist. Inside, fury hardened into something cold, sharper than anger. I looked at Cordelia, my face composed, my silence steady. I would not give them the outburst they wanted. But I etched every word into memory, carving it into the ledger I would one day balance. Every boast, every laugh, every toast. They didn't realize they were fattening the calf before the slaughter. Evenings settled like a heavy curtain, drawing the family into the living room. The table from brunch had been cleared, the scent of leftovers lingering faintly in the air. Guests settled into couches and armchairs, their laughter spilling over in waves, all directed at Cordelia as he once again commanded the room. He leaned back, drink in hand, every gesture punctuated with self-importance. Rowena sat to his right, her eyes bright with pride, nodding at every boast. Aster hovered close, adding her affirmations at just the right moments, like a practiced chorus. The relatives followed suit, clapping, chuckling, leaning forward in admiration. I sat at the far end, back straight, face calm, watching every detail. Their comfort was an illusion, and illusions always crack. My silence was the chisel. Justice is a delayed train, but when it arrives, it shakes the station. Tonight, I felt the rails trembling. My phone buzzed quietly in my lap. I glanced down. A message from James, my assistant. Forwarding documents. You'll want to see this. Attached were files, emails, spreadsheets, transfers. I opened them with a practiced eye. The numbers screamed corruption. Cordelia's landmark deal had been patched together with funds siphoned quietly from other accounts. Some mine, some belonging to investors who had trusted the family name. He hadn't just robbed me. He robbed every soul who had believed in him. I scrolled further, seeing his boasts reframed in cold black and white. He covered failures with embezzlement, layering lies upon lies, until the future of the family was nothing more than a hollow balloon ready to burst. My chest tightened. My silence had built his pedestal. My money had dressed his lies in silk. But the truth was laid bare now, undeniable. I lifted my gaze back to the room. Cordelia's voice still rang out, recounting risks he had taken, vision only he could see. The guests applauded, their ignorance almost painful to witness. For a fleeting second, I wondered if I should speak, cut through their noise with fact. But no, truth exposes itself when arrogance grows too loud. My patience would serve me better. At the edge of the room, I caught a whisper between two guests. I heard something. Whispers about Cordelia's deals. Not everything lines up. Seeds of doubt. They were already planting themselves. I only had to wait. The wait ended sooner than I expected. Cordelia raised his glass again, voice booming. To new beginnings, the biggest year yet for our company. His phone rang. He frowned, waving off the room as he answered. But his voice carried, and silence fell as the words spilled into the open. What? A lawsuit? His tone cracked. No, that can't. What do you mean public filing? Tonight? Who leaked it? The room froze. Guests exchanged shocked glances, whispers running like ripples across the surface of a pond. Cordelia's face flushed red, his chest heaving as he tried to collect himself. Rowena jumped in quickly, her voice brittle but firm. It's just business complications. Every company faces them. But no one believed her. The energy shifted. Admiration drained into unease. The louder they had laughed earlier, the quicker their silence fell now. I sat, hands folded, watching as vindication tightened around me. He had mocked me in the garage, stripped me in front of them all. Now he was being stripped by his own lies, naked before the very audience that once worshipped him. I stood slowly, calm and deliberate. My movements pulled every eye toward me. I connected my phone to the television screen. The guests murmured, confusion threading through the room. Let me add context, I said softly. The screen lit up, and there it was, the security footage from the garage. The buzz of clippers, the sight of Cordelia pressing me down, the laughter ringing out as locks of my hair fell to the concrete. Gasps spread like a wave. A cousin covered her mouth. One uncle muttered, "My God." Rowena stiffened, her face blanching. Cordelia froze, the lawsuit still echoing in his ears, now compounded by evidence of cruelty displayed on the family's own television. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The truth does not need a defense, it only needs light. The laughter they had offered so freely last night now returned to them, but it sounded different, harsh, cruel, undeniable. The clip ended. Silence suffocated the room. I let it linger, stretching, pressing into them until the weight was unbearable. Finally, I spoke, my voice low, clear, and cold. That was your entertainment. Now, it will be your legacy. The morning after felt heavier than any night before it. The house, once alive with chatter and the clinking of glasses, now carried only whispers. Guests moved in corners, hushed tones replacing the booming laughter from just hours earlier. I walked into the dining room where breakfast had been laid out. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. No one reached for the food. The clatter of silverware was absent, as though even the forks and knives felt ashamed. Cordelia sat slouched at the far end of the table, avoiding every glance. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. Not a word came from him. He had spent years craving their admiration, and now he shrank beneath their silence. Rowena stood by the stove, pouring coffee into mugs. Her hands trembled. She tried to maintain her air of control, offering, "Eat something, everyone. We shouldn't let one bad evening spoil family time." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I sat down quietly, watching them all. The air was thicker than smoke, pressing on every chest. The louder the night's laughter, the deeper the morning's silence. I pushed my chair back and stood, my voice steady though the weight of the room pressed against me. "You should all know something." Every head turned. Cordelia stiffened, but didn't lift his gaze. I continued, calm and deliberate. "The company you've all been praising Cordelia for? The house you've been sitting in, mocking me under? They belong to me. I am the CEO, and this house was purchased under my holding company." Gasps moved through the guests like wind rattling windows. Forks froze midair. Some relatives looked at their plates as though ashamed. Others turned to me with wide eyes, their faces flushing. Rowena's lips parted, then tightened. "Madeline, don't dramatize." I met her gaze without flinching. "You mocked me under my own roof. That laughter you indulged in last night, it was borrowed time." Uncle James shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "Is that true? All of it?" "Yes," I said simply. "While you clapped for his stories, I was the one signing the deals. I didn't build this for applause. I built it for independence." No one applauded this revelation. Silence was my ovation. Then Enola, the guest who had mistaken me for help days ago, spoke up. Her voice was scratchy from the wine of the night before. "Funny thing is," she said, her words slow but sharp, "she owns more than all of us combined. I said it last night, but I guess no one wanted to hear it." The room stiffened. No nervous laughter followed. Enola looked around, daring someone to deny it. Some relatives nodded reluctantly, finally acknowledging what they had long suspected but chosen to ignore. Their eyes flickered between Cordelia and me, the balance tilting visibly. Rowena tried to salvage control. "We only wanted to toughen you, Madeline. Life isn't easy. We thought—" I cut her off, voice flat. "You rewrote cruelty as guidance, as if words could bleach the stain." Rowena faltered, her coffee pot trembling in her hand. I sat back down, calm. Bitterness lingered, but alongside it came the cold satisfaction of truth revealed. They could twist their stories all they wanted, but the truth had become undeniable. Cordelia shifted uneasily, rubbing his temples. For years he had been the golden child, glowing under every spotlight. Now he looked shrunken, restless, like a man exposed in daylight after living in shadows. No one rushed to his defense. No one raised a glass to toast him. Aster, who had once echoed every word he spoke, stayed quiet. Her eyes darted between him and me, fear settling into her expression. She seemed to realize her complicity no longer protected her. I studied them both, my voice low but resonant. For once, I don't have to prove myself. Your silence has already done that. The weight of years of humiliation inverted itself, landing not on me, but on the guilty. I rose, looking across the room, every face trained on me. My voice carried, clear and certain. They wanted me invisible. Instead, I became unforgettable. By midday, the house felt like it had been turned inside out. The night's revelations hadn't stopped echoing. They had spilled into the world outside these walls. My phone buzzed constantly, the screen lighting up with notifications, news articles, market alerts, whispers from people who had never before spoken my name aloud, now plastering it on headlines. One cousin whispered nervously in the kitchen, "Did you see the headline? Cordelia's name is everywhere. Fraud, embezzlement, he's finished." I stood in the doorway, watching them. Cordelia paced the living room, his shirt untucked, forehead damp. He barked into his phone. "I need a lawyer. No, I don't care what it costs. Just fix this." He hung up, muttering to himself. They'll spin it, they always do. But no spin could bury what had already surfaced. Neighbors outside whispered on the sidewalk. Guests who had once toasted him now avoided eye contact, clutching their mugs of coffee like shields. It wasn't my voice tearing him down, I thought. It was the truth he'd buried. And the truth always digs itself free. The weight was no longer mine to carry. It sat squarely on his shoulders, dragging him lower with every tick of the clock. At last, Rowena broke the silence. Her eyes were tired, but her tone still carried that brittle edge she thought passed for authority. "Madeline," she began, "you must understand, everything we did, all of it, was for your good. We only wanted to toughen you up. Life is hard, and you needed to learn." Her words cut sharper than her silence ever had. I looked straight at her. By locking me in the garage, by shaving my head for sport, that wasn't teaching. That was cruelty dressed as care. She pressed on, voice rising, trying to salvage control. "You're misinterpreting. Families have their ways, different forms of love. We never meant to hurt you." Gasps and murmurs rose from the guests. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes betraying that they recognized the lie. I held her gaze. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, even in a family dining room." The words settled over the room like a gavel's strike. Rowena's mouth opened, then shut. She had no answer. For once, her performance faltered. Bitterness tightened in my chest, but above it was clarity. I wasn't angry because she lied. I was angry because she believed the lie herself. I reached into my bag and withdrew a thick, sealed envelope. The room stilled as I placed it in the center of the table, sliding it toward Rowena and Cordelia. Cordelia frowned. "What's this supposed to be?" "Open it," I said calmly. He tore at the flap with shaking hands. Papers spilled out, financial severance documents, legal notices, signatures that severed every tie they had to my funds, my accounts, my support. Rowena's face drained of color. Cordelia stammered, You can't do this." I leaned forward, my voice steady as stone. "This is the last check you'll ever cash in my name." Gasps rippled through the guests. One uncle muttered, "Good Lord." Another relative whispered, "She really did it." I sat back, my voice low but clear. "For years you thought I owed you. Today, I've paid in full. And I've closed the account." Cordelia shoved the papers back into the envelope, his fingers trembling. "You think you can just cut us off? We're family." "Family?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Family doesn't make you sleep in the garage. Family doesn't laugh while your dignity is stripped away. Family doesn't bleed you dry, then call it love." The room was silent. Some relatives looked horrified, others impressed. The power shift was undeniable. For once, the control rested in my hands, and they knew it. I reached into my pocket once more and drew out a small keychain. Slowly, deliberately, I placed the house key in the center of the table beside the envelope. The clatter of metal against wood echoed through the room. "Lock me out again if you must," I said evenly. "But remember whose door it is." Cordelia's face contorted, Rowena's lips trembled, but neither spoke. The image of their power crumbled in real time, witnessed by every pair of eyes in the room. Guests sat frozen, the sound of the key still ringing in the silence. It was triumph, but not loud. It was justice, quiet and final, the kind that settles into bones. I rose, my voice calm, but edged with the weight of every year I had endured. They thought my silence meant surrender. But silence was only the drum roll before the verdict. The house after the storm carried a silence so thick it clung to the walls. No one dared laugh. No one dared toast. Guests who had once leaned forward eagerly now kept to corners, their voices hushed as though even a whisper might break the fragile air. Shame had settled in, and it was suffocating. Cordelia no longer strutted. He paced, shoulders hunched, muttering under his breath like a man cornered. His phone sat abandoned on the coffee table, screen flashing with unanswered calls. He avoided every eye in the room. Rowena sat in her chair, but the mask of matriarch pride had cracked. She clutched her hands together, her knuckles white, her face drained of its usual fire. She had built her authority on control, on her ability to bend perception, but now she seemed small, shrunken under the weight of her own performance. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, observing them all with clarity. The anger that had burned in me for years was quiet now. This wasn't rage, it was revelation. For the first time, their silence wasn't my prison, it was theirs. I climbed the stairs to the guest room where my small bag rested on the floor. I didn't need much. A sweater, folded neatly. My notebook, its pages filled with ideas written in secret. The car keys I'd placed on the dresser when I first arrived. Each item felt like a reminder of something I had always carried: independence. I zipped the bag slowly, the sound breaking the silence like a declaration. The ragged blanket they had thrown at me, the dog's blanket, lay at the foot of the bed. I picked it up, holding it for a moment. It smelled of every insult, every dismissal, every way they had tried to remind me I was less. Then I folded it, neatly, precisely, and placed it on the chair. I wasn't taking their shame with me. I was leaving it behind, exactly where it belonged. As Oprah Winfrey once said, I murmured, surround yourself with only people who are going to lift you higher. Tonight, I chose myself. I shouldered the bag. The weight was nothing compared to the years I had carried under their roof. When I descended the stairs, I found them waiting. Not bravely, not kindly, but with the desperation of people who had lost their footing. Aster spoke first, her eyes darting anywhere but mine. Madeline, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Her voice faltered. She let the apology die before it ever reached me. Rowena stood, her voice trembling but determined. Families fight, but blood is blood. We've always been one, and we can heal from this. You can't just walk away from us. Cordelia said nothing. He sat in the corner, head bowed, sulking like a child deprived of his toys. I listened, my face calm. Inside, I felt nothing but clarity. They wanted words from me, I thought, but silence was my final language, so I said nothing. I walked slowly, deliberately, past them all. Each step was its own answer, louder than anything I could have spoken. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some turning their heads, some watching me intently. They knew. The fracture was permanent. No amount of pleading could stitch this back together. I reached for the door. The evening air hit me, sharp and cold, but it no longer felt like exile. It felt like freedom. The same chill that had once punished me now cleared the air from my lungs, crisp and bracing. I walked to my car, my hand firm on the handle, my reflection staring back at me in the window. No longer the girl with a shaved head shivering in the garage, no longer the disappointment. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather warm against me, and started the engine. The hum was soft, steady, reassuring. As the headlights cut through the dark, I looked once more in the rearview mirror. The house loomed, smaller now, shrinking with every inch of distance. I wasn't leaving broken, I whispered to myself. I was leaving whole. The road stretched ahead, open and waiting. They had defined me as the failure for decades, but tonight I rewrote my name in ink they could never erase. In the weeks that followed, the world delivered its verdict with a force no courtroom could have matched. Cordelia's name appeared in headlines across the country, no longer draped in praise but stamped with scandal. Lawsuits multiplied, the word fraud attached to his face like a brand. The guests who had sat in that living room, who had watched the footage, who had seen the lawsuit break, spread whispers that grew into shouts. What my family thought they could contain within those walls now poured into the streets, into newsrooms, into every corner where their reputations had once stood untouched. Rowena, who had cultivated an image of perfection for decades, found her world shrinking. At church, whispers followed her down the aisle. At the grocery store, old friends turned their carts down different rows. The same people who once admired her matriarch's pride now shook their heads with pity, or worse, with disdain. Aster suffered her own collapse. At her office, colleagues forwarded the viral video of her laughter during my humiliation. She walked into work one morning and found silence waiting. No greetings, no smiles, only the weight of judgment. The neighbors avoided her, their waves replaced with shuttered blinds. I watched from afar. They had laughed at me as entertainment. Now the world laughed at them as disgrace. Cordelia fought harder than any of them, but his downfall was swift. He resigned under pressure, his assets frozen, every boast he had made now dissected by the same press that once printed his promotions. He raged, called lawyers, shouted into phones, but each call ended the same. There was nothing left to salvage. Rowena clung to excuses. The media exaggerates, she told anyone who would still listen. But her voice shook, and even the loyal ones began to distance themselves. Invitations stopped arriving. The dinner parties where she once held court dwindled to nothing. Aster's world shrank until it was just her and her own reflection, staring at a face she no longer recognized. Even Enola, the guest who once mistook me for the help, sought me out. She wrote a letter, then visited my office uninvited, her eyes red with shame. "I am sorry," she said quietly, "for what I said, for laughing, for not standing up." I listened, I nodded, but I did not absolve her. Forgiveness wasn't mine to hand out like favors. They had written their own punishment with their choices. As the saying goes, karma has no menu. You get served what you deserve. At Summit Enterprises in Manhattan, my board greeted me with respect that contrasted so violently with my family's contempt. Meetings began with silence until I spoke. People listened, not because they feared me, but because they trusted me. Building Summit had never been about revenge. It had been about freedom, about proving to myself that I could build something strong enough to stand when everything else collapsed. I stood in my office, the city skyline glittering behind me, and thought, I was no longer the girl in the garage. I was the woman who owned the roof. A month later, I bought another property back in Pennsylvania. Not the old family house. I let them keep that hollow shell. I bought a place of my own, bigger, brighter, a statement not of wealth but of choice. I decided who belonged under that roof. For the first time, peace settled in. I realized I didn't need their recognition anymore. I had given myself all I ever sought from them: acknowledgement, dignity, and love. One evening, a letter arrived from Rowena. The envelope bore her neat handwriting, the kind she used for thank you notes and holiday cards. Inside, the words twisted between apology and excuse. She wrote of misunderstandings, of wanting the best, of hoping we could find our way back. I folded the letter once, then again, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. I didn't need their words, I thought. My life was my answer. I poured my energy into my company, into the people who valued my leadership, into causes I cared about. For the first time, my world was built only of those who lifted me higher. Maya Angelou once said, "Success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it." Finally, I did. They had locked me in a garage on Thanksgiving. They had shaved my head to shame me. But I walked out owning it all. And the only thing I lost was the need for their approval. Next Thanksgiving, the house will be warm again, but only for those who know what family truly means.